Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us here for our Agri-Pulse webinar here today. Looking forward to the discussion that we're going to be having on scaling innovation for climate action and the roadmap ahead. My name is Spencer Chase. I am the managing editor for Agri-Pulse Communications here in Washington, where I have the opportunity to interact with so many of you on this topic and many others that we cover at agripulse.com. Before we get going, some brief housekeeping items. I'm going to offer some very brief introductions of our distinguished speakers and panelists. I would encourage all of you, if you're looking for more comprehensive biographies, to check by our website, where also later today you will be able to see this full video, later today, perhaps into tomorrow, the full video on agripulse.com. Also would love to hear from all of you as part of this conversation, and we'll encourage you, as if questions arise on your end that you would like to have answered, by all means submit those to us by way of the Q&A function rather than the chat function in this particular Zoom experience for all of us. That's also the place where you can type any issues you are having in terms of technical difficulties. Somebody on our team will do our best to assist you. Also appreciate the support of Pivot Bio for their sponsorship of today's webinar. And without any further ado, I'm going to dive in and welcome our first speaker, and that is Illinois Democrat Cheri Bustos. Congresswoman Bustos represents Illinois' 17th Congressional District, currently serves on the House Committee on Agriculture and the Committee on Appropriations. Prior to her election, she had a career in investigative journalism and also worked in healthcare. She has a bachelor's degree in government and politics from the University of Maryland in College Park, a master's degree in public affairs reporting from the University of Illinois at Springfield, and I suppose at this point probably a Ph.D. in agricultural policy, or at least an honorary one after all of your years on the House Agriculture Committee. Congresswoman Bustos, we appreciate you joining us.
All right, thank you very much for that introduction. I appreciate it. You forgot to mention I come from a long line of family farmers as well, so that hopefully that gives me a little street cred here. But hey, thank you for the introduction, and I appreciate Pivot Bio also sponsoring this, and certainly to the Agri-Pulse folks. You guys do such a great job of getting the word out on the important issues of the day. Obviously, and speaking of that, our family farmers and our rural communities obviously play a key role when we're looking at the climate change through innovation all over this world. And so I can't think of something more timely than this. Look, I think that global climate change may very well be the most complicated challenge of our nation and the world that we've ever faced. And addressing it is going to require all of us. I don't care what kind of industry you come from. I don't care what part of the country or the world you come from. We're all going to have to play a part in this. Very quickly, a little bit about the congressional district that I represent. It starts in central Illinois and covers the entire northwest corner of the state of Illinois. It's 7,000 square miles altogether, 14 counties. We have 150 towns. And most notably, for the purposes of this conversation, we have 9,600 family farms. So where I'm from, we know that farming and climate go hand in hand, and that the livelihood of our ag economy relies fundamentally on predictable weather patterns and climate. And so not only do we need to listen to the science of climate change, but we also need to take action. And with rural America at the forefront of this fight, we need to make sure that we have a seat at the table. And that is why, gosh, I don't know, probably going on 2-3 years ago now, we actually published out of my office something that we call the Rural Green Partnership. And that's a framework of policies and principles that are geared toward addressing our climate challenges, all while spurring economic growth in the heartland. And so climate change, we know, doesn't have to be just an obstacle that we overcome. I hope that as we continue this conversation, not just today, but in the months and the years ahead, that we really see it as an opportunity for innovation and for investment in agriculture. And by working all together, as I said at the outset, we really can play a role in mitigating risk, increasing resilience, and incentivizing new markets, and at the same time creating jobs in rural America. So what I'm going to do in my remarks to you, and before we open it up for Q&A, is is list 5 ways that I've proposed that we can accomplish this. So number 1, we can expand and improve conservation programs. So we've already have established programs that are respected and are well known among the folks who are tuned into this today. But these can be a key part of our climate plan if we use them effectively. We actually need to increase the number of technical experts who can offer customized and one-on-one conservation advice to our producers. We see a need for that. And when I go home, I hear the need for that. We need to explore these new markets for ecosystem services and establish economic incentives for the adoption of conservation practices. And by taking this approach, we can improve resilience, we can prevent erosion, and we can sequester more carbon in our soil, our crops, and our forests. Number 2, we need to invest in rural infrastructure. It's really infrastructure should be the foundation of new green economic growth. That means things like faster broadband speeds. We've got $100 million that are going into every one of our states around the country to take high-speed internet to every corner of our country. But that will allow our growers and our producers to take advantage of GPS for precision agriculture at the highest level. That can be an expanded grid, and it also involves building carbon dioxide pipelines so we can transport captured carbon in places where it can be stored and used. Fortunately, we passed this bipartisan infrastructure bill last year, so help is on the way. So we just have to keep up that pace. Number 3, clean energy development. We need more large-scale projects like wind farms, like solar fields, so we can bolster domestic energy production. And by leveraging and using things like zero and no interest loans and tax credits and grants, that's how we can incentivize new clean energy development and how we can drive down greenhouse gas emissions. Number 4, increased funding for research. So we can tackle problems that are ahead of us that are going to require extensive innovation. And fortunately, we have universities and labs and companies like Pivot Bio that are leading the way to develop new technologies and agricultural practices that are very, very important to not just states like mine in Illinois or regions like mine, but all over the country. And again, that is why when you look at something like my Rural Green Partnership, and for those who have tuned into this, if you'd like a copy of that, I can have my team post in maybe the comment section how you can take a look at that, or we can send that out to anybody who would like to read what's in the Rural Green Partnership. But through something like that, we're calling for increased federal investment for research on farming practices and sustainable land uses, clean energy, and carbon capture. And then number 5, workforce development. Much of the work addressing climate change will be done by young people. I don't know the demographics of those tuning in today, but I hope there's a lot of young people on this. And if they're not, spread the word about this. It's on all of us to make sure that the next generation of family farmers and people in the ag industry have access to training. So really critically important. This means leaning into our own networks of places like community colleges, like our university, our land grant universities, apprenticeship programs, technical training colleges, and making sure that we all play a part in preparing the workforce that will be able to grow into what we need in our rural economies while also addressing climate change. And really by taking action on these 5 proposals that I just laid out, that's how we're going to make sure that our family farmers in the ag industry really are at the forefront of climate action. When I worked in healthcare, you mentioned that in your when you were going over my bio. Working in healthcare, I was involved in that before, during, and after the Affordable Care Act, and I was lucky enough to work with a CEO where we took some action in our own hands, saying we would rather be at the forefront of it than always being told what to do. by government. So I think that's really an attitude that we can take in agriculture. But that's how, we have to look for creating economic opportunities in rural America. And beyond the Rural Green Partnership, there are steps that we can take to support farmers and help our environment right now by leveraging our biofuels. Look, again, coming from Illinois, we're in the congressional district that I represent, we have 7 biofuels plants in or around the congressional district that I serve. So you can, if you see me talking on any national show about Ukraine and about the price of fuel, I keep saying we've got to blend ethanol because that's a way that we can bring down a cost of a gallon of gas by 50 to 60 cents a gallon. So that's a way we can also reduce carbon emissions right now. So, it's a way to save money. It's a way to bring down emissions. And so it's something that we've been working on out of our office for quite a while now. Also, it's called the Next Generation Fuels Act. And also, we've got something called the Homefront Energy Independent Act. And it basically advocates for higher renewable volume obligations, it as RVOs. And we're working with colleagues both on the House, in the House and the Senate, and among Democrats and Republicans. So really, really happy to partner with President Biden on leading the way in supporting ethanol blending. And also, I don't know if you hopefully you saw the announcement recently where the Biden administration would rescind 31 oil refinery waivers that have allowed, I like to joke that these, little boutique oil companies like ExxonMobil who were given the waivers. As a way to avoid blending ethanol. So I was very pleased with that announcement as well. And just this month, President Biden also announced an emergency order to reverse the freeze on E15 sales this summer. So I think those are really, really important as well. So just in closing, let me say that, we've got significant challenges. You know that. We've got to be at the forefront of protecting our planet and our climate. So as we talked about the future generations and the younger generations, so they'll have an opportunity to take action that hopefully to build off of what this generation is doing. It's an opportunity for us to improve the ag industry, I think, and also to support our rural economies. And really, again, I want to thank everybody involved with putting on this webinar. It really gives me faith that we are willing to work together to address these challenges. And I think we can have a bright future in agriculture. So with that, I am happy to take any questions that anybody may have, and look forward to doing my best to answer those.
Yeah, for sure. We've got time for a couple of questions here. And again, appreciate you joining us. I guess one thing that I was wondering is, agricultural innovation is much like innovation in other sectors. It happens on a daily basis in a number of different places in a number of different ways. Congress, by and large, there are some exceptions, but Congress, by and large, does agricultural legislation once every 5 years via the Farm Bill. So how does Congress and the legislative branch, what approaches do you think they should take to best stay on top of the agricultural innovations in the marketplace and best suiting the needs of American farmers by law?
Well, look, I'm going to answer that, Spencer, in a way that how I approach my own job. I mentioned the geography of the congressional district that I represent. If you think about having a 7,000 square mile congressional district and 150 towns and 14 counties, to really get a handle on what our family farmers want from me, I go to the source. I don't say, hey, you fly out to Washington and come to my office. We have 13 farm bureaus in my 14 counties, and we have roundtable discussions with all of them. Every August, when members of Congress are not in Washington, that goes back to the days when we didn't have air conditioning out here and it's hotter than heck in Washington. We always have what we call a district work period. I spend my August on something that we call the 21st Century Heartland Tour. And that is when I sit down in barns and on the corner of fields, or sometimes in the middle of cornfields, where I just listen. And I'm chairman of the General Farm Commodities and Risk Management Subcommittee of Ag. And what we're going to do to begin laying the foundation for the 2023 Farm Bill is we're going to do a roadshow. And our first 3 stops that we have planned are, we're going to go to Minnesota, we're going to go to Iowa, and we're going to go to the state of Arizona. And we're going to invite in bipartisan fashion our Republicans and Democrats to just listen and say, what's working in the current Farm Bill? What's not working? What do you want us to know? So that's a long answer, Spencer, to say, we got to go to the source. We got to listen. And then, we don't need to make policy in Washington, D.C. without deep consideration and consultation with the people who are doing the work. I think WOTUS is an example of making sure we're listening to people and getting policy right.
And quickly here, because I know you've got another commitment to run to, and we do again appreciate your time. But you did mention conservation programs as part of your initial statement there. There was talk potentially about whether or not there's going to be the infusion of some new money in the Farm Bill through some additional reconciliation legislation, the Build Back Better plan, as it were. Not seeing a ton of legislative activity there, but I say all of this to ask, what should be expected in terms of the investment and perhaps an additional investment in conservation spending going forward from the Congress?
Well, I think at this point, it is so unpredictable. What was known as the Build Back Better Act, obviously we didn't have the votes to get that through. So that's kind of begun again. But I think as we look ahead, I think that we have an opportunity to continue investing in and incentivizing climate smart ag practices, not only to help our environment, but also to boost our family farmers' bottom lines. And USDA pilot initiatives like the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities and the Pandemic Cover Crop Program are a way that we can help collect data and see what's working and what's not. And then we can use policy going forward to help build on those pilots and create new programs and leverage existing ones so we can incentivize climate smart ag practices. So I think it's a matter of leveraging existing conservation programs like CRP and EQIP, and then that way helping to use climate smart ag as we move forward.
Well, very good. Obviously, a very deep conversation, and one that you and I could probably spend quite a while discussing. But out of respect for your time and frankly the audience's sanity, we will have to reconvene another day here. But Congresswoman Bustos, we appreciate your time. Thank you, Spencer. I appreciate it. Take care. We'll now pivot in our webinar to and I use pivot in a bit of a tongue-in-cheek fashion there. Our next guest is Karsten Temme, CEO and co-founder of Pivot Bio, where he leads a team that is unlocking new ways to provide nitrogen and other key nutrients for cereal crops. Pivot Bio offers an alternative to chemical-based fertilizers in the form of naturally occurring nitrogen-producing microbes. He received his Ph.D. at the University of California in San Francisco. Also on our panel today is Pipa Elias. Pipa is the Deputy Director of the Environment Program at the Walton Family Foundation. Before joining the foundation, she worked at the Nature Conservancy, where she was Director of Agriculture for North America. Prior to her work on the agriculture team at TNC, Elias was a Senior Policy Advisor leading land use policy advocacy at the United Nations climate negotiations and other multinational venues. She received her Master's in Forestry from Virginia Tech and a Bachelor's in Environmental Science from the University of Notre Dame. And last but certainly not least, providing us with a producer perspective here today is Patty Mann, a producer from Ohio. Mann Farms is a family-owned grain operation which was established in 1987 in Jackson Center, Ohio. They are dedicated to producing high-quality corn and soybeans. Mann is also a board member with the Ohio Corn and Wheat. She, along with her husbands Dave, children Shelby and Chris, and son-in-law Ethan, strive for high standards and commitments to excellence by engaging in ethical, honest production practices and environmental stewardship within their operation. Looking forward to a conversation, a broad-ranging conversation with the three of you. I'm planning on posing some questions, and I hope you as a member of the audience are as well. Again, please use that Q&A function rather than the chat box to submit those questions for our panelists. And Karsten, I'm going to go to you first, because it seems as if some of the agricultural innovation that we've seen has been the result of some, folks kind of popping the hood on what they're doing and seeing what could be better, maybe in the form of a pilot project. Do you think we're at the point potentially where we can learn from some of the pilot projects that we've seen, maybe in the private sector, maybe on producers on their own, to perhaps scale that innovation as the title of the webinar would suggest?
I think so. And I think what has historically been constrained to the realm of pilot projects, or maybe trying to apply some practices to squeeze efficiency out of what we do today, there's this moment of innovation that's upon us. And it means there are going to be new classes of products that can help the entire industry step forward when it comes to the resiliency, the profitability, and ultimately the environmental friendliness of everything we do.
Mm-hmm. So I would be remiss, I suppose, if I didn't give you a kind of a second to offer your 30-second elevator speech on Pivot Bio and your company's role in the agricultural innovation conversation.
Definitely. And maybe I'll start by saying the thing that inspires us at Pivot is to be able to help improve that resiliency of every one of our operations, to be able to improve the profitability of the farm, the ability to be able to pass that on to the next generation, and at the same time, protect all of our natural resources. Our contribution happens to be through nitrogen. Like you mentioned, our goal is to take what is historically about a 50% effective product when it comes to the fertilizer we use, and reinvent that. Use microbes that live in the roots of the plant to take air, the nitrogen in the air, and turn that into ammonia, something that is nearly perfectly efficient and doesn't have the same nitrous oxide emissions or nitrate runoff that we'd experience today. So better performing nitrogen, also something that's really relevant for our conversation today.
Very good, very good. And Pipa, I want to go to you next because we've heard from the private sector, but wondering what you assess as sort of the nonprofit, the NGO role in trying to get agricultural innovation into a more mainstay, more mainstream form of production agriculture. Your thoughts?
Sure. Thanks, Spencer, and thanks for having me today. It's really exciting to be here. So the Walton Family Foundation is a family-led foundation, and our environment program is committed to a future in which both people and communities and nature can thrive. And through so many of our partners, almost all of whom are the NGOs working in this space, we've seen that NGOs are a critical player across. Actually, I think Representative Bustos put it really well. Like, some of the biggest needs we need in innovation beyond technology that often companies are better positioned to lead at. But she talked about reducing risk, about supporting producers, and creating new markets. And we have seen that our NGO partners are critical in advancing all of those elements, right? They can reduce risks through innovations and new financial models, working with, how producers can think about really a long transition that it takes to move to a more kind of climate-friendly agriculture, if you will. About supporting producers, I think we all recognize that another innovation we need is really that network of people on the ground, of trusted advisors to producers wherever they come from, to really help them think through the right management in their operation, to shift to both kind of maybe lower greenhouse gas farming, but also more resilient production in the face of climate change. And then finally, creating new markets. And many of our partner NGOs are in that space, thinking about how to make credible markets that can financially support operators while also truly meeting environmental challenges.
We can come back to this later, but I assume one of those new markets that you're discussing involves an element starting with a C.
Yeah, let's get to that.
Yeah, well, we'll put a pin in that and come back to it later. But before we do, I want to bring Patty into the fold here, because obviously any conversations that involve production agriculture need to involve someone who does it on a daily basis, and that's why we're so glad to have Patty here involved today. And Patty, I guess my initial question for you is just your thoughts and maybe an education you can provide for us on some of the various forms of agricultural innovation that we might see in practice on your farm.
Thank you, Spencer, and thanks for having me today. So glad to share what we're doing on our farm. And as we're waiting for the weather to allow us to get started planting here, and we're going to be utilizing quite a bit of precision ag tools that have actually became pretty mainstream in the ag community. But three of the products that really allow us to be sustainable on our farm is, of course, satellite guidance. The accuracy of that is improving. It's within a sub-inch now, thankful to ever-increasing broadband capabilities. And as you may know, this accuracy allows us not to overlap either strips while planting or applying sprays. So that saves input costs, protecting runoff of possible herbicides to the environment. So section control on our planters and sprayers is also what allows us to save seed. As many of you know, when we start to plant a field, we will plant all the outside rows first. And then when we start going back and forth, the section control allows those rows to shut off as they cross over those lines that was previously planted. So really a big savings in input there. VRT, or variable rate application of fertilizer. We've been utilizing that for probably 10 years or so by now, but we apply fertilizer just according to our soil test data. In the spots in the field that need more fertilizer, we can apply more. On the spots where we don't need as much, we put less, and some spots need none at all. So, of course, fertilizer has always been our biggest input cost. And this year, the way we all know how prices have catapulted to where they currently are, we're always looking on ways to save costs there. So we're in the Lake Erie watershed here in Ohio, and with the water quality challenges that has presented us, fertilizer runoff is a big concern of ours. So high-speed technology has been around for quite a few years, but this year we've invested in it on our farm and really excited about high-speed planting this year. It seems like our planting window is ever shrinking. And in one pass this year, we're going to be placing seed, fertilizer, microbes, and fungicide. So these all eliminate a possible pass for later nitrogen to be applied, and may eliminate an aerial pass of fungicide later in the season. So applying 4 things at once is exciting and greatly lowering our costs and also our emissions.
Very good. Well, I mean, that's obviously some of the long lists of things that producers currently have access to when it comes to agricultural innovations. But let's talk about some things that are on the horizon. And Pipa, we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but the idea of carbon markets, carbon sequestration, we heard Congresswoman Bustos talk about pipelines perhaps being in the CO2 future. Your thoughts, Pipa, on the role of carbon sequestration in climate smart agricultural conversations?
Sure. I guess I'll answer that two ways. I mean, I think first of all, carbon markets are kind of viewed as one big monolith and often seen as just an offsets opportunity, right? That, a producer reduces this many emissions, let's say from doing, 1 pass rather than 4, and someone else gets to buy those and use those, like an airline or something. And I think something that has really shifted the conversation over the past few years is just a different way of thinking about the opportunity to use, let's say, climate-friendly practices to be connected to markets in a different way than just offsets, which I think is particularly important when you are looking at soil carbon sequestration. So there's a lot of different things. Patty just went through many different ways that her farm is reducing their emissions. There's some low-hanging fruit that are easier to measure, like changes in fertilizer application that aren't soil carbon sequestration. I'm a soil scientist. I love soil carbon sequestration, but there are some challenges to using it in a traditional kind of offset market. And so I'm just really excited that the conversation has just really opened up for a lot of different ways that producers could voluntarily participate in some kind of environmental market and therefore benefit from their climate smart practices.
Karsten, from the private sector standpoint, there obviously your company is one that has made quite a bit of its news, its reputation relating to nitrogen. So when you hear about the prospects of expanding this innovation conversation beyond just the prospect of carbon sequestration, I have to imagine that gets you a little bit excited.
Well, I think Pipa framed it well. It's a moment to be excited because there's so much new possibility. And what was historically maybe a challenge in trying to squeeze a little bit more efficiency out of a process that is fundamentally inefficient or ineffective. Now we're at a new moment in time, and I always love to talk about nitrogen. That's Pivot's slice of the world to help innovate. The ability to have permanence when we can sequester carbon is ultimately linked to our ability to have better organic nitrogen in the soil to lock that away permanently. And so an element of what we do is contributing to that portion of the path forward. And the other part that is extremely exciting for Pivot is the dimension that is related to nitrogen emissions and nitrogen runoff. By being able to take a step change forward and have a radically different way of producing nitrogen on demand for crops, and moving from a 50% effectiveness of fertilizer to something that's almost perfectly effective, we have a new tool to permanently prevent one of the biggest sources of nitrous oxide emissions on the planet from ever happening. And it's something that's just never been possible before. So it's a new dimension in the conversation that I hope we can help shine a light on and bring more attention to on the path forward.
Well, and on that path forward as well, I have to imagine that as you look for some of these solutions, you have to also keep in mind the varieties in geography and production styles for products themselves that producers are producing. How do you work that into the conversation? The fact that there are so many different forms of agriculture out there, so many different geographies, so many different soil types that, perhaps I hate the phrase, one size fits all, but frankly, a one size fits all approach might not be the most advantageous here. How do you approach that issue, Karsten?
I think ultimately the job of the folks in industry, the innovators like Pivot, is to be able to expand the toolbox that's available for every farmer, grower, producer. It's being able to give a set of options so that Patty and anybody else who has a different set of challenges based on their region can design what fits best and be the best steward of the land that they can be. And so I think that's the lens we try to take when we think about what microbes producing nitrogen could mean to an operation, or how preventing some of those nitrous oxide emissions from ever happening could be flexible for everything else that's happening on the farm.
Patty, and just kind of generally speaking, maybe zooming out from any kind of specific product or practice or anything like that, how long do you as a farmer, as an operator, feel comfortable taking from taking something from maybe an experiment you try in one field to a mainstay in your production system that you're going to try across your operation?
I would say we are not the first adopters of new practices, but I like to be an early adopter. So we will typically do a research trial for a year or two, and if we see where it has a place in our operation that can be helpful, we will definitely use it more wide scale.
Mm-hmm. So then, with that in mind, innovation is something that is going to take maybe several years to become a little bit more widespread across your operation. I being the product of an agricultural operation myself, I don't think you're alone in that kind of a time frame. Do you then, what is it that makes you convinced to take something more main scale across your operation? Is it returns? Is it yield? Is it profit? Is it other outcomes? Your thoughts there?
Well, I'd say you hit them all on the head there. It would be all of those, keeping in fact sustainability in mind, but yes, return on investment for sure.
Mm-hmm. So Pipa, given what Patty just said there, the time frame that she's going to need, the return on investment that she's going to need, how does that frame the conversation then at the NGO and maybe even the governmental level about trying to get some of these new innovations that we might see to scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously that's of the utmost importance is, at the end of the day, moving our agriculture along with our farmers and ranchers to a more successful future for both, them, their families, communities, and the environment. And so I think, we think a lot in philanthropy actually about how philanthropy can kind of be that bridge, either, supporting nonprofits who can work with producers, or looking for to bring kind of education and solutions to policymakers who can think about, what does that, really look like? What's the path there? And, it's not just one answer, right? It's like we need to build a bridge out of a lot of different pieces to help move operations forward. And so we need to think about kind of like how can policy and the government kind of provide some of those fundamentals, whether it's some of the measurement and reporting information that would be necessary to spur a market, or how can philanthropic money support all the commercial loans and funds that operators are using annually and over multiple timescales. So I think what does make this kind of hard is that you need to build that bridge out of so many different pieces, but that's what we and our partners are constantly thinking about, how to help move forward with a lot of different solutions.
Well, and you mentioned the role of philanthropic money there, because, and I, correct me if I'm wrong, I assume some of that is being offered by way of financial incentives for producers to take part in some of these practices, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously, again, Representative Bustos mentioned the importance of conservation funding from the Farm Bill and the cost share there. And I think, that model is certainly really important. But we're also trying to think about different ways that, we could deploy our philanthropy at the foundation for other opportunities, whether that's, different loan rates or direct payments, or again, spurring different markets that can support that. So again, I think that's another innovation we think about, certainly not technological, but an innovation around thinking, again, with cost share as the base, what else can we do to think more creatively about those financial opportunities?
So I'm going to dive into the questions from the audience here. As one popped up that I was, looking to bring into the conversation. A question from Laura Hart asked, when talking about markets, is this about farmers being required to use sustainable farming practices, to gain access to markets? The more sustainable farming practices used, the better market prices the farmer has access to. I guess, Patty, your thoughts on, potential, requirements being placed on you as a producer to gain market access?
I'm not so sure that I would be in favor of certain requirements, but I do think that farmers should be recognized, valued, and compensated for what we do. And I think in the future, there will be, concerning the carbon, deal and all that, I just think there's going to be more and more focus on compensating farmers for certain practices.
So, but you'd like to see that compensation happen by way of things like a price premium or something of that nature, rather than a requirement to participate in the market?
Well, as a farmer, I sure can't say that I would not appreciate any more regulations. So yes, possibly market tied.
Mm-hmm. So, Karsten, what as we talk about folks needing to potentially look at their role in the marketplace and the practices that they are taking part in, I have to imagine as a private sector company that will put you all in a bit of an interesting position. But your thoughts on what producers can do to scale up those sustainable practices and in turn potentially receive market premiums as a result?
Well, I think the way we approach it at Pivot is our ultimate job is to put nitrogen into the crop as that fuel source for the crop more efficiently and at a better price per unit than any other option that's available today. And so we strive to design and build products that make life easier, give the grower a peace of mind and a better consistency to ultimately produce that return on investment. And in some ways, the byproduct of what we do is we eliminate all of the inefficiencies where synthetic nitrogen would be lost to the environment. And there's a lot of value in that to all of us as global citizens. So that should be an extra benefit that we can recognize and flow some of that value ultimately to the grower. I think that's one of the challenges we face today. How do we appropriately consolidate the data around those benefits, be able to reduce the burden of sharing that information with folks who would want to incentivize that benefit and make those markets get off the ground? That's never been possible at scale in agriculture before. And I think it's the heart of what Representative Bustos talked about and what we're starting to talk about in this panel.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the issue of measurement that you bring up there, obviously such a key role in the carbon market conversation, but in other agricultural sustainability practices as well. What more do you need to know as a private company as you develop new innovations and perhaps look to bring those to the market?
Well, for us, I think we've got a bit of a unique challenge. The science around nitrate runoff and nitrous oxide emissions is very well understood. It's very rigorous science, and being able to reduce the amount of inorganic nitrogen in the soil has a direct benefit on permanently preventing those emissions and that runoff from ever happening. And so for us, the challenge is simply how do we record and capture the information on shifting your nitrogen budget to use more and more nitrogen produced by our products, our microbes, and being able to get that in the hands of everybody who wants to incentivize and recognize the value of preventing those emissions from happening.
Mm-hmm. Pipa, in your conversations, not only with producers, but also, maybe with your fellow, philanthropic community, and also, frankly, maybe some folks in Congress. What more information is needed about some of the existing agricultural innovations out there and some of the ones yet to come that might help them scale to a greater level of acceptance?
Yeah, this is something that I think about often. I think part of what our challenge in agriculture is for folks who don't work in this space, it looks like way too complicated and complex. So we have a lot of conversations with folks who are really interested from a climate perspective about what they can do to address the climate challenge overall. And then they kind of turn to us and they say is agriculture an opportunity? Is it not? We're hearing a lot of conflicting messages. And what we really try to tell folks is part of the benefit of the complexity, again, is that we're talking about a lot of different opportunities that operators can, I think, Patty put it perfectly about how a market could and should work. They can voluntarily work into their operations to create greenhouse gas benefits. And so I think, we often turn to just the hard numbers and the data as what needs to be addressed. But I think it's equally kind of the agriculture community messaging a little more clearly that there's some pretty easy wins and some low-hanging fruit that are easier to measure. And there are kind of longer term opportunities that either need more R&D or a little more time to figure out how to measure those outcomes. So I think, there's things are in very different places. I would just add, one more piece that I think is an opportunity in the next Farm Bill is creating, a little more of clarity and commonality that the government could support for kind of that baseline and some numbers we could kind of all work from to help really spur innovation and opportunity in the private sector. So I'll just add that piece as well.
Mm-hmm. Karsten, a question was submitted for you from Mark Edelman, wondering what level of producer pilots Pivot Bio is involved in regarding demos of nitrogen microbes and in how many states. So basically wondering what level of scale Pivot Bio is observing in its products at this point.
Hey, it's a great question. As a company, our first product hit the market in the fall of 2018. And so we've got a few products on the market. Pivot Bio Proven 40, our second generation corn product, and Pivot Bio Return for wheat, sorghum, and some of the other small grains. And we've been able to rapidly scale our footprint. So this year, our product is being used at planting across well more than 3 million acres here in the U.S. And what we've really tried to focus on is being able to continue building that scale, especially given the macro environment around us and the pressure put on fertilizer pricing and availability. So for us, the goal is to be able to meet the needs of growers all throughout the U.S. and across the coming years, hopefully being able to help support some of the growers globally.
Mm-hmm. As you work on, we've discussed this a little bit earlier, but as you do work on some of the different products for different crops, some of the different regions that you're working in, what do you learn as a company as you try and grow the product and what it might need in terms of differences because of soil types, because of agronomic practices, because of products? What do you learn in that process?
I think one of the biggest things we've learned is just how inconsistent synthetic nitrogen fertilizer is in terms of performance. At the end of the day, our product is a living microbe that its food is sugar produced by the crop itself. And that symbiosis is very consistent across all types of soils and geographies. And the consistency of that performance, that symbiosis, is actually higher and better performing than synthetic nitrogen. And so I think what we continually strive to do is measure how much nitrogen is ending up in a crop. I think historically the barter between a grower and the fertilizer company is how many pounds of nitrogen are applied to the soil, with an uncertainty on how much is actually ending up in a crop. And I think we should maybe flip that on its head and say the real expectation and the measurements we make is how much nitrogen is in the crop and what's the efficiency of producing bushels per unit of nitrogen.
And quickly, before I take the conversation a little bit elsewhere, just a quick question for you, Karsten, from Joel Stone. The Pivot Bio test pilot plots, are you talking about measurement of sustainable organic material or carbon sequestered?
We're ultimately focused on how much nitrogen is fueling the productivity of that acre. That drives the ultimate economics of the acre. And then the secondary types of information we look at is how are we reducing the loss to the environment, the loss as nitrous oxide or nitrate runoff. Because ultimately it's about making sure that more of that nitrogen produced is, or that nitrogen applied to the field is all ending up in the plant, and shifting that balance so we have less and less need for a synthetic nitrogen in any acre. So that's what all of our measurements are focused on. And it's something we do in partnership with our commercial customers and on all of our research plots throughout the US.
Very good. Patty, I want to throw you a question presented by Michelle Chang. And she asked, what is the biggest hesitation for producers when it comes to enrolling in the current carbon program offerings out there? What are you hearing maybe across the dinner table, across the fence row from your neighbors? What are you hearing about the current biggest hesitations?
Well, it just seems like, and as you've probably heard many times, the carbon markets are the wild, wild west, but it seems like no one company has entirely figured out how it would function. There's a lots of opportunities to sign up with different companies, but there's just a whole lot of unknowns yet at this point, I feel.
So what would make you feel better? Just the existence of a market for several years? What is it that would kind of assuage those concerns for you?
Yes, consistent markets over a number of years, and just more specific outcomes, results they're hoping for, and which practices are going to, guarantee the payment from the program that you sign up for.
Yeah, Pipa, I see you nodding. Your thoughts on some of the existing producer hesitation when it comes to carbon markets?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of any producer, but I definitely agree with Patty that it feels a little unclear right now how and where to dive in, and again, to that question of like what practices do we do? What do we actually incorporate into our operation? I think, that just goes back to something we heard from Representative Bustos, and it's just such a common issue right now, which is really getting the technical assistance and the know-how out there, so that, operators who want to start shifting into this space have a trusted person they can go to who could help them figure out what is the best thing to do on their operation to actually be able to meet the needs of these markets that are being developed. I think that's just an enormous gap that, again, we've been thinking so much about, measurement and how much money and all these other pieces. We've kind of forgotten the piece about actually getting out there to the, millions of operators in the country and supporting them.
Mm-hmm. Patty, a question was submitted actually specifically for you here, asking Brett Rudolph, asking what kinds of assistance are most needed to support producer adoption of climate smart practices at meaningful scales? What are the things you most need to support adoption?
Okay, well, I do have some notes on that question. It's an investment, of course. Technology always comes at a price. As Congresswoman Bustos stated, the need for improved rural broadband, that is so dependent, the technology is so dependent on good internet for it to work. I feel we need good government policy to incentivize innovation, and always we need to increase consumer awareness of the benefits of precision ag and biotech, not for just our profitability, but for safeguarding the environment as well.
Very good. Question submitted, and as we kind of come to a close here, a question submitted by Ashley McKean, wondering what role, and I'd like all three of you to answer this one, what role can policy and the upcoming Farm Bill have on advancing regenerative agriculture? Pipa, I see you nodding your head. I'll go to you first.
I'm a DC person. I love the Farm Bill. Yeah, I mean, I think there's an enormous opportunity to align our current conservation spending as a country with kind of more innovative approaches, and again, what the private sector is doing. I think right now it's a little bit seen as, here's kind of our government conservation cost share program, and like, oh, this is really cool. A lot of companies are getting more interested in either, supporting climate smart agriculture and kind of moving to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in their supply chain. And I think we need a little more connectivity between those two and really think about how there can be more synergy between our federal spending and supporting what's moving in the private sector. That's just one piece.
Karsten, your thoughts on just government policy, the Farm Bill, et cetera, and ways that can avenues there available to help advance regenerative agriculture?
I think, I'll speak through the lens of my passion, nitrogen, and I think it reads more broadly into the entire industry. As I mentioned at the top of the panel, this is a moment when innovation means we can move from the stage of pilot projects and practices, and there are going to be entire new classes of products that help usher in the next age of resilient agriculture and new scalability and profitability for our growers. Through the lens of nitrogen, 7% roughly of greenhouse gases emitted every year are linked to nitrous oxide. And we can entirely eliminate that class of emissions if we can rethink the way we produce and deliver nitrogen to crops. And so being able to find a clear way to tackle that slice of sustainable agriculture and make it easy to share that data throughout the industry from the farm to eventually carbon market buyers. That's the part that I'd like to be able to focus in on. It's a very crisp, annual, recurring, and definite impact we can have, and it can run in parallel to anything we're talking about in terms of carbon sequestration and the permanence on that part of the equation.
Very good. And Patty, your thoughts on government policy on the Farm Bill and its role in this conversation?
I think continuing education for the farmers and then possible incentives to encourage climate smart ag practices, and then compensation for those doing so.
Very good. Well, we are just about 3.5 or 4 minutes away from the conclusion of our time together here, and appreciate everybody's time in this space. I'm going to offer up the opportunity for the three of you to offer any closing comments, maybe anything in particular you'd like to leave our guests with that have joined us. And Patty, I'll start with you. Any particular closing thoughts and biggest impressions you would like to leave with our audience?
Yeah, for sure. Just concerning the whole sustainability conversation, just knowing that soil is our greatest asset. And I just want consumers to know how important precision ag tools and biotechnology, how important they are to allow us to do more with less, and also with less environmental impact.
Very good. Pipa, parting thoughts?
Yeah, I think I just want to kind of echo again my optimism about the opportunity that we have right now and the moment we're in. I think we are poised to really help shape agriculture of the future to be, both really reflecting the environmental stewardship that so many operators already do, and also being more resilient to the climate change that is already happening and impacting our ability to produce food. And I'm excited about what we can do to shape that and make agriculture more resilient in the next few years.
Very good. And Karsten, I'll give you the last word.
I'd build on that and say I look at the world around us right now, and I see so many examples of why agriculture is the bedrock of society, and the need for our agricultural system to continue to support our communities around the world has never been greater. And I think this is a moment when leadership from our growers across America is such an opportunity to step up and be able to combine a stewardship of the land with new innovations that drive profitability for the generations to come, and that merges together in something that really is resilient to a very rapidly changing world around us. So I think it's a great moment for innovation and leadership for our American growers.
Very good. Well, Karsten, Pipa, and Patty, we appreciate you joining us, and we appreciate also the earlier comments that we heard from Congresswoman Cheri Bustos. Thanks again to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to chat with us and to inform our audience about the issues when it comes to scaling the climate smart innovations that are going to be so critical to food and agriculture going forward. Just as a friendly note to our audience, if you are interested in seeing the duration of this panel down the road, you will have that opportunity soon at agripulse.com. But I think that is going to do it for today's panel. Would encourage you again to stop by that agripulse.com recording later on, and we will be sure to archive this conversation for you there. But for today, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.